On the night I thought I'd start forever with the love of my life, my stepbrother leaned over to my husband and whispered, "You could do better." I wish I'd known that was the beginning of everything falling apart. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Lena, and a few months ago I got married to Caleb, the man I believed was everything I had ever prayed for. Caleb was kind, loyal, and hardworking. He wasn't flashy or loud, but he had this steady way of making me feel safe. That night, in my wedding dress, surrounded by friends and family, I felt like I was standing in the middle of a dream. I thought nothing could break the joy I felt. But there was someone who didn't share my happiness, my stepbrother, Troy. Troy had always been the kind of person who wanted to be the center of attention. Growing up, he competed with me over everything. Grades, friends, even approval from our parents. No matter what, Troy had to win. I knew he didn't like Caleb. He'd made little comments before, but I never took them seriously. After all, it was my life, not his. That night, as we celebrated with dancing and laughter, Troy pulled Caleb aside. I saw it happen from across the room, but didn't think much of it. Later, Caleb told me Troy had leaned in close and whispered, "You could do better." Caleb said he laughed it off, but I noticed a flicker in his eyes, a tiny shadow. At the time, I brushed it away. We were newly married, and nothing Troy said could change the way Caleb loved me. Or so I thought. The rest of the night went on like any wedding should. People clapped, glasses clinked, and my heart was so full it felt like it might burst. I held Caleb's hand, smiled at my family, and promised myself I wouldn't let Troy's bitterness touch me. I told myself it was just another one of his jealous digs, the kind I had ignored my whole life. But later, as we left the party and Caleb kissed me goodnight, I noticed he was quieter than usual. His smile seemed a little forced, his thoughts far away. I didn't realize then how powerful a single poisonous sentence could be, or how quickly doubt can slip into even the strongest bond. That whisper, meant to sting, was the seed of something much darker. And though I didn't see it that night, it was the first crack in my marriage. The first weeks of marriage were supposed to feel magical, but the glow faded sooner than I expected. At first, Caleb and I tried to hold on to that warmth, but little by little, I noticed him slipping away. He started asking questions that felt less like curiosity and more like criticism. He wanted to know why I worked the hours I did, why I wore certain outfits, even why I spent time with the friends I had always trusted. His tone wasn't harsh, but it carried a doubt that unsettled me. Troy began showing up more often than I wanted. He came by under the excuse of checking in, acting like he cared about our new life together. On the surface, he was polite, smiling, even offering to help with little things. But hidden in his words were needles that pricked at me. He'd make comments about how Caleb deserved someone more polished, or how maybe my priorities weren't in the right place. He never said it outright, but the meaning was always there. Caleb listened more than I realized. After Troy's visits, he seemed quieter, more guarded. It was as though a thin wall had risen between us, one I couldn't see, but could feel pressing against me every day. When I laughed at something small, Caleb would glance at me with suspicion, like he was trying to figure out who I really was. His once warm eyes carried an uncertainty that I didn't understand. Soon the little disagreements started. They weren't big fights, just sharp words over simple choices. He'd ask why I chose to meet an old friend for coffee instead of staying home. He'd question why I chose one outfit over another, saying it didn't fit the image he thought a wife should present. These arguments left me confused and hurt, because before, Caleb had loved those very parts of me. What unsettled me most was the pattern. The moments that sparked these arguments often traced back to something Troy had said. Maybe he had commented about a friend I kept around. Maybe he had laughed about the long hours I put into my job. Whatever it was, Caleb seemed to absorb those words, and they showed up later in our conversations. I tried to tell myself it was just the normal adjustment of marriage, that all couples struggled at first. But deep down, something felt wrong. The warmth that had once come so naturally between us was cooling, and no matter how much I reached for him, I felt him pulling back. I didn't know it yet, but Troy's steady hand was guiding the shift, laying pieces of doubt in Caleb's mind one by one, turning love into distance. It started with whispers I wasn't meant to hear. Troy had a way of bending stories from my childhood, mixing a little truth with a lot of poison. I didn't know exactly what he told Caleb, but I could see the change. Caleb no longer looked at me with the same trust. His questions grew sharper, and his silences longer. He said he had more work to do at the office, and soon the nights stretched with him gone, leaving me alone in a house that felt colder with each passing day. I tried to reach out, to ask him what was happening, but he would brush me off with vague answers. The man who once shared everything with me now guarded his thoughts like a stranger. The distance between us widened, and I couldn't ignore the shadow Troy's presence cast over our lives. When the pressure became too heavy, I turned to Ruth, my stepmother, hoping she would see the truth in my words. I told her how Troy lingered, how his comments always left me uneasy, how I felt him trying to drive a wedge between Caleb and me. But Ruth only smiled softly, shaking her head. "He's just protective," she said. "That's how he shows he cares." Her words made me feel small, as if I was imagining things. Each time I tried to explain, the same response came. I was overreacting, being sensitive, twisting harmless gestures into threats. Their dismissal left me feeling invisible. Gaslight. It was as though the reality I lived wasn't real to anyone else. I began to doubt myself, but deep inside, a voice screamed that what I felt was real. To stay grounded, I picked up a notebook and started writing everything down. Every strange glance, every unexplained late night, every sharp word that didn't fit the Caleb I once knew. I recorded it all. The pages became my only witness, proof that I wasn't losing my mind. Still, the unease only grew stronger. I could sense the weight of secrets building in the silence between Caleb and me. Each time he came home late, I wondered what lies Troy had poured into his ears while I was left in the dark. My heart told me that something far deeper than ordinary marital tension was pulling us apart. And though no one else seemed to see it, I couldn't shake the truth pressing against my chest. Something was terribly, terribly wrong. It was late when I passed by the den and heard my name spoken in low voices. I stopped, heart pounding, pressing myself against the wall to listen. Caleb's tone was heavy, and Troy's was sharp with satisfaction. I couldn't catch everything, but the words that reached me pierced straight through. "I just don't think she's the woman you thought she was." My stomach dropped, and my hands shook as I tried to steady my breath. When I stepped into the room, both of them fell silent. Caleb looked startled, Troy looked smug, and the air was thick with something I couldn't name. I asked what they'd been talking about, but they both shrugged it off as nothing. Caleb forced a weak smile, insisting it wasn't important, while Troy leaned back with that lazy grin I had grown to despise. His eyes told me everything. He wanted me to know he was planting doubts, and he was proud of it. From that night on, the distance between Caleb and me grew even sharper. His eyes lingered on me with suspicion, and every word I spoke seemed to be measured against some invisible scale. I wanted to believe he still trusted me, but the way his jaw tightened when I spoke, the way his hands fidgeted when I reached for him, told another story. Troy, on the other hand, reveled in the tension. Each time our paths crossed, he gave me a look that twisted my inside. It wasn't just a smirk, it was a declaration, a silent message that he was winning whatever game he had set in motion. It left me feeling cornered in my own home, powerless against his lies. But I wasn't willing to let him destroy me without a fight. I knew if I confronted them head-on, they'd just deny everything again, and I'd be left looking paranoid. So I decided to be smarter. Quietly, carefully, I began to keep track of every detail. I saved messages that didn't feel right. I started recording conversations when I was close enough to catch their words. I wrote down dates, times, and the smallest shifts in behavior. It became my secret project, the only way to hold on to my sanity. Every piece of evidence I collected was like a lifeline, proof that I wasn't imagining this unraveling. I didn't know what I'd do with it yet, but I knew I had to be ready. If Caleb's trust was breaking, I had to find a way to protect the truth before there was nothing left of us at all. The blow came on an ordinary evening, without warning. Caleb stood in front of me, his phone clutched tightly in his hand, eyes burning with a mix of hurt and anger. He said he had proof I had been unfaithful. My body went cold. He showed me messages I had never written, conversations with numbers I didn't recognize. Every word on the screen felt like a knife, each line a twisted version of me that didn't exist. I tried to explain, tried to swear on everything I loved that it wasn't true, but he wouldn't listen. His voice cracked as he told me he couldn't look at me the same anymore. The humiliation washed over me like fire. This man I had built my life with believed a lie more than he believed me. I could barely breathe as I realized what had happened. And then there was Troy. He put on a mask of sympathy in front of others, patting my shoulder, telling me it would be okay, pretending to be the supportive brother. But when no one else was watching, his eyes gleamed with triumph. The satisfaction radiating from him was impossible to miss. He wanted me to see that he had pulled the strings and I was tangled in them. Days later, Caleb packed his things. He said he needed space, time to clear his head. I watched him leave with a suitcase in hand, and though I wanted to scream, to beg him to see the truth, the words caught in my throat. The door closing behind him sounded like the breaking of something inside me that could never be put back together. The betrayal cut deeper than I thought possible. It wasn't just the loss of Caleb's trust. It was the realization that my own family had done this to me. The people who should have protected me had stripped me bare and left me bleeding. The ache of that knowledge was worse than loneliness. But in the silence that followed, something hardened inside me. The tears dried, replaced by a calm I didn't expect. Beneath the heartbreak, Anger began to form, not the wild kind that burns out fast, but a steady flame that refuses to die. I knew then that I couldn't wait for someone else to save me. If Troy had chosen war, then I would meet him with something stronger. My pain began to sharpen into resolve, cold and precise, the kind that could not be shaken. With Caleb gone, I knew words alone would never clear my name. Every denial sounded empty against the pile of lies I was accused of. I needed proof, something undeniable, something outside my own voice. That's when I made the decision to bring in a private investigator. Handing over the little savings I had left felt like placing my last hope in a stranger's hands, but I was desperate. The days waiting for answers stretched long and heavy. I replayed every moment, every strange glance, every cruel smirk, wondering what else had been hidden from me. When the investigator finally returned with findings, I braced myself, but nothing could have prepared me for the truth. It turned out Troy hadn't been working alone. He had reached out to Bree, Caleb's old flame, the one person most likely to hurt our marriage. He had been feeding her stories, fabricating messages, twisting events so that she could warn Caleb about the woman he married. The betrayal was deeper than I'd imagined. This wasn't just petty jealousy anymore. It was a calculated effort to ruin me. Piece by piece, the picture became clear. Troy and Bree had been in steady contact, their communication carefully hidden. Lies were planted not only in Caleb's ears, but also in the circles around us, spreading doubts about my character. What stung even more was realizing how easily Caleb had been swayed by their scheme. But the darkest revelation was motive. Buried beneath the chaos was money. If my marriage crumbled, Troy would find his way closer to the inheritance my family had set aside. It was never about love or loyalty or even dislike. It was greed. Cold, selfish greed that had driven him to rip my life apart. The knowledge burned inside me, but instead of rushing to reveal it, I chose silence. I didn't confront Caleb. I didn't run to Ruth. I didn't expose Troy yet. I tucked the evidence away like a weapon, waiting for the right time. My silence became my shield. Every time Troy looked at me with that self-satisfied expression, I forced myself to smile back, hiding the storm brewing within me. He thought he had won. He thought I was broken, powerless. But in reality, I was gathering strength, holding on to the truth he never expected me to uncover. Quietly, carefully, I began to prepare for the moment when his lies would unravel, not with my words, but with his own. I knew patience was my weapon, and when the time felt right, I set the trap. I reached out to both Caleb and Troy with a calm, forgiving tone, suggesting we gather for a simple family dinner. I played the part of someone ready to put the past behind, pretending to be softer than I felt. They agreed, neither suspecting the true reason I wanted us all at the same table. Before anyone arrived, I made sure my recorder was hidden and ready. My hands shook as I adjusted it, but my face wore nothing but a warm smile when they walked through the door. Caleb looked tired, guarded. Troy, on the other hand, carried himself with smug confidence, as though he had already won. I greeted them kindly, offering food and conversation, all while keeping my voice light. Throughout the evening, I slipped in careful remarks, small suggestions that I might know more than they believed. I asked questions with an innocent tone, letting my words hang in the air just long enough to unsettle. I watched Troy closely. At first, he brushed it off with jokes, but I caught the twitch in his jaw, the way his glass lingered too long in his hand. Sweat began to gather at his temple, and though he laughed, the sound was thinner than usual. Caleb stayed quiet, glancing between us, clearly sensing tension but not grasping its source. I kept steering the conversation, guiding it toward the subject I knew would reveal what he worked so hard to hide. Then, with practiced ease, I brought up the inheritance, speaking as though it meant nothing to me. I shrugged, almost dismissive, as if I hadn't given it a thought in years. The bait was irresistible. Troy leaned forward, his mask slipping. He couldn't resist showing how clever he thought he was, dropping words he should never have spoken. His pride pushed him past caution. Every sentence tied him tighter to the scheme he had spun. His arrogance blinded him, and in his eagerness to show control, he revealed far more than he realized. I kept my expression steady, nodding as if I barely understood, while inside my chest a fire roared. The recorder captured everything, every slip, every admission. Troy thought he was still playing the game, but what he didn't know was that the game had already shifted. The evidence I needed was no longer scattered fragments. It was his own voice, sealing his fate at a table he believed he controlled. When the moment came, I didn't hesitate. I reached for the device I had hidden and pressed play. The room fell silent as Troy's own words filled the air, every twisted claim, every conversation that exposed his deceit. The sound of his voice telling Caleb lies, mocking me behind my back, bragging about his cleverness. It was all there, impossible to deny. Caleb froze, eyes locked on the table as the truth sank in. The color drained from his face, his expression collapsing into disbelief. He looked at me as though seeing me for the first time in months, and I saw the weight of realization crash down on him. Troy's reaction was instant. His smugness shattered, replaced with rage. He stood abruptly, knocking his chair back, shouting that I deserved every bit of it. His voice shook with fury, spitting out excuses, claiming I was never good enough. But his anger only confirmed what the recording had already proved. Ruth, pale and trembling, rushed to shield him with words that rang hollow. She stammered about how he hadn't meant it, how he was only trying to protect the family. But each defense crumbled under the sound of his own admissions. The evidence left no room for doubt. What he had done was laid bare in the harshest light. Caleb finally spoke, his voice breaking as he turned to me. He tried to apologize, tried to explain how he'd been blinded, manipulated, convinced by the lies. His hands reached toward me, trembling, but I couldn't move closer. The wound he had allowed to grow between us was too deep, and no words could patch it now. My silence said more than anything I could have spoken. The night ended with Troy being forced out. He shouted as he was pushed toward the door, his pride crumbling in front of everyone. The same man who once smirked at me like he had already won now left in disgrace, his own voice having condemned him. As the door shut behind him, the room was heavy with what had just unfolded. Caleb stood there, broken, Ruth shaken, but I felt only a strange calm. The lies were finally exposed, the mask torn away. The truth had exploded in front of them all, and though it could never mend what was already destroyed, it gave me the one thing I needed most, proof that I had been right all along. The days after that dinner felt strangely quiet. The storm had passed, but the damage was plain. I knew what I needed to do, and it wasn't easy. I went to a lawyer and began the process of ending my marriage. It wasn't revenge that drove me. It was survival, dignity, and the understanding that love without trust was already gone. Caleb tried to stop me. He showed up at my door with tearful eyes, begging for another chance. He said he had been blind, that he wanted to make things right. His voice carried regret, but his words no longer reached me. For too long I had been the one carrying the weight of believing, of forgiving, of excusing. I couldn't be that person anymore. Walking away was painful, but it was also the first step toward freedom. Troy's fall came quickly. Once the truth spread, the inheritance he had hoped for slipped from his grasp. Family members who had once defended him now turned their backs, ashamed of his betrayal. He lost more than money. He lost their trust, their respect, even his position at work when word of his lies made its way outside the family. The man who thought he could manipulate everyone was left with nothing but the wreckage of his own making. I packed up my belongings and moved out, leaving behind the house that had become a prison of doubt. Starting over felt terrifying, but it also carried a sense of relief. I rented a small place of my own, where each room echoed with possibility instead of suspicion. Every box I unpacked felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that had been stolen. Slowly, the people around me began to see the truth too. Friends who once looked at me with suspicion reached out, apologizing for not believing me sooner. Their words didn't erase the hurt, but they softened it. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel completely alone. As the weeks passed, the noise faded. The chaos that had consumed my life was replaced by calm evenings, quiet mornings, and the steady rhythm of healing. It wasn't dramatic or sudden. Peace came like a gentle tide, washing away the bitterness bit by bit. I still carried scars, but they no longer defined me. For the first time since that whisper on my wedding night, I felt the weight lifting. I was no longer trapped in their lies. I was finally stepping into my own life. Months later, a plain envelope arrived at my door. Inside was a letter from Troy. The words were meant to sound regretful, a mixture of apology and justification. I read it once, then set it aside. There was nothing left to say, no response that could change the past or repair what he had broken. I let it sit unopened after that, a reminder that some people's remorse is never meant for reconciliation. A few weeks after, I bumped into Caleb at a small cafe. He looked older somehow, worn by the weight of guilt he had carried for too long. He tried to explain, to tell me how hard it was for him to forgive himself, how the memory of those months haunted him. I listened, letting the words wash over me without interruption. When he paused, waiting for me to answer, I simply said, "I already did. Just not for you." There was no anger in my voice, only calm. The words surprised him, and maybe even surprised me in that moment. It wasn't about him anymore. It was about me reclaiming my peace, my dignity. As I walked away from the cafe, I felt a clarity I hadn't known in years. I thought about all the trust one had given, all the betrayals I had endured, and all the lessons I had learned. Betrayal had hurt me deeply, but it had also made me stronger. I realized that strength didn't come from retaliation or punishment. It came from releasing the hold others had over me, from refusing to carry their guilt and lies any longer. I paused for a moment, looking at the sunlight breaking across the street, feeling the quiet in my chest. I had survived manipulation, deceit, and heartbreak. I had rebuilt myself from the pieces left behind. And in that stillness, I understood something vital. True freedom wasn't about proving anyone wrong or seeking vengeance. It was about letting go, moving forward, and finally choosing myself. Sometimes revenge isn't about getting even. It's about getting free. Hey besties, thanks for sticking with me till the end of this emotional ride. Imagine your stepbrother manipulating your husband, lies tearing your marriage apart, and betrayal coming from those closest to you. Painful, right? But sometimes facing deceit helps us find strength we never knew we had. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, drop a comment, and subscribe for more. See you next time.